Hi, I'm Tina Desiree Berg, and welcome to the 34th.
What we need to do to deal with this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality is make sure that those people who are working, you know what, Mr. Bloomberg, it wasn't you who made all that money. Maybe your workers played some role in that as well. And it is important that those workers are able to share the benefits. Also, when we have so many people who go to work every day and they feel not good about their jobs, they feel like cogs in a machine. I want workers to be able to sit on corporate boards as well so they can have some say over what happens to their lives.
Mayor Bloomberg, you own a large company. Would you support what Senator Sanders is proposing?
Absolutely not. I can't think of ways that would make it easier for Donald Trump to get reelected than listening to this conversation. It's ridiculous. We're not going to throw out capitalism. We tried that. Other countries tried that. It was called communism, and it just didn't work.
So there was Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, going after Bernie Sanders. Richard Wolff, you describe yourself as a socialist economist. Respond to what both Paul Krugman says and what Bloomberg is saying here.
Sure. There is no agency, neither public nor private, that defines what a socialist is. If you follow the socialist movement for the last 150 years, you would discover that it has been a contested terrain from day one. There were different interpretations and different meanings. Bernie Sanders is perfectly in line with one of the traditions of what socialism is. It's the government having a big role in offsetting some of the awful qualities of capitalism. But we also know that the kind of control that the government tries to operate is very difficult for it to succeed with. We once had a New Deal in this country. We lost most of it because we didn't go beyond a government intervention to change the society. What Bernie Sanders represents is an awareness that it's time to have a conversation we should have had for 75 years about our capitalist system and whether we can do better. This is now a changed environment in which what was taboo in this country isn't anymore. And Bernie has already achieved the breaking of a taboo in this country to talk about socialism, its strengths and weaknesses, its different interpretations, and compare them to capitalism, rather than running away because nasty conservatives call us various names. That's not a profound reason, and for the young people of this country, it doesn't carry much weight anyway. So I welcome the opening that Bernie achieves, that we can talk about socialism, its different interpretations, and why we ought to explore them a lot more than we've been able to under the taboo of the last 75 years.
Today, my guest on the show is Dr. Asatar Bair. He has a PhD in political economy and wrote this interesting book on prison labor and economics. Welcome, Dr. Bair.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is we're sort of having a revival of discussion as far as communism is concerned, what communism is defined as, et cetera, and how that sort of juxtaposes against capitalism. I wanted to get your thoughts on what you thought were the main differences or the main misconceptions Americans have of the differences in regards to the two types of political economy.
That's a great question. My first thought on it is that notions about communism as being an enlightened kind of society, as being a good society, are very, very old. Communism is become associated with Marxism because, of course, Marx and Engels and the Marxist tradition had a lot to say about it, but it's far, far older than that. I mean, Thomas More describes, in Utopia, right, written in the 1500s, describes basically a society, a classless society where, wealth is distributed on the basis of need. And, the early Christians, had similar types of vision for their communities. So it's a very, very old idea and a very idealistic idea. What Marxism added to it was to say that communism will abolish exploitation. And By exploitation, it's meant the taking of the products of surplus labor. That
Right.
is, the individual produces, right, for themselves, enough for themselves by whatever standards are socially constructed, whatever the producer needs. And then they produce above and beyond that surplus labor. And the central question in Marxism is, well, who takes that surplus labor? Who owns it? Who gets to control what happens to it, right? So the Marxists say, well, it is simply unethical and it's immoral to have somebody take it who did not produce it. And, that is, however, very, very common. I mean, that's the basis of society, really, of civilization, as far back as we have history. And so, Marx and Engels' famous statement, the existing history is a history of class struggle, right? Meaning a struggle over the surplus. So, a very old idea, but, one that's been given a particular spin, right? To say, we're going to abolish exploitation, and that's something that kind of has to happen first. Now, what would that society look like? We actually have no idea, right? Because
Right.
there is no society that we can point to, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
we have scattered examples. I mean, what do we know about how these early Christians lived? The Essenes, right? What do we know about their communitarianism? Well, actually, very little, right? And of what we know, how much of it does it apply to, a modern industrialized society? Well, like nothing, right? I mean, so, it's like you pursuing a distant land that you think exists, and it's kind of a dream,
Mhm.
but dreams are important, right? Because that gives you a sense of direction, like what does a good society look like? And so, the Marxist tradition says, well, it's based on sharing, it's based on cooperation. I mean, this is not a society that would, if we had the ability to prevent it, we would never, ever allow somebody to starve to death, to go without medical care when that's available, right? To the extent that we had the wealth, the ability to take care of everyone, of course we would do so, right? I mean, that's what sharing and cooperation is, right? So that's a very appealing vision. It's like saying, well, could we have a large scale society that operates more like a family, right? I mean, it's inconceivable within a family to say, well, listen, you're going to have to starve because, though we do have enough, you didn't quite work hard enough, and so now you die. I mean, that would be insane, right? Except that basically is the basis of modern society, and this is why 9 million people globally starve to death each year, despite a global food surplus. So, I mean, we are kind and loving to each other in small groups, but we are absolutely brutal to each other on a large scale. And I think that's the dream of communism, that we could close that circle and, treat each other in a, benevolent manner, and in a manner that doesn't leave anybody out, in which there's no one on top oppressing those on the bottom. And, so I think, like, when we talk in this manner, there's not going to be a lot of people that are going to disagree with me, right? There's not going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, no, damn it, I think people should starve, right? I mean, because that's, that's crazy. And I think, okay, if we stay on this level, all right, no disagreements. But then if we say, well, okay, what practical steps would we need to take in order to get to that point? All right, well, now we're going to start having some disagreements, right? And so, the Marxist tradition actually has a lot to say about this too, right? Because, one of the most famous documents ever written, of course, is the Communist Manifesto, right? And the Communist Manifesto says, a specter is haunting Europe, stuff like this, right? So, specter of communism, and what is that? And goes into okay, here's the history of feudalism and its brutal exploitation, and then it gives way to this new kind of exploitation. What is this? And it's different, and how do we understand that? And what harm is it causing? And all of this, right? And what should we do to try to mitigate that harm? And discuss as well, okay, here's efforts to reform the brutal excesses of capitalism, and why that's not adequate, right? I mean, they're like, well, this basically won't work. which I think has been very much vindicated in the 150 years since, because, have the various reforms of capitalism been able to, just about, I mean, if we just talk about the one concrete one that I mentioned, right? People starving to death. I mean, that's a pretty bad one though, right? I mean, imagine if we eliminated that from the human experience. I mean, what a liberation that would be, right? I mean, given that, for the million or so years that humans have been around, starvation has been pretty much the central issue, right? I mean, just getting enough calories. I mean, if we look in the grand sweep of history, but that's not the central issue now, right? I mean, we produce enough food.
Yeah, it's false scarcity.
Yeah, it's a false scarcity, exactly. Why should we permit that? And so, of course, their solution is, well, look, the workers need to seize the means of production. We should not allow a few people to own what is really the property of all. I mean, land. Why should land be owned by a few? And if it is owned by a few, are they not going to become fantastically wealthy? Yes, right. All available history says yes, absolutely, right. And what about factories? What about equipment, infrastructure? Well, yes, right. I mean, so the very first thing we need to do is to rearrange that, right? To have that owned by the government. Now, here's where we start getting into things that are contentious, right? Very quickly, because that, I mean, any attempt to change the existing distribution of property.
Can I ask you a question? Can you explain for the audience, because I understand what you're saying here perfectly well, but I think there's a lot of confusion with the general population on the differences between private property and personal property. What you're talking about here is private property, which is not the same as personal property. And I think that's where it gets a little bit awry for some Americans, because they think you're going to eliminate you even having a dwelling to live in, which is not the case. So if you can get a little bit of the details of those differences, I think would be helpful for folks.
That's true. Very good point. I mean, this is like the thing everyone says, like, oh, I'm not going to get to have a toothbrush. What about my toothbrush? I mean, everyone has to share a toothbrush, of course, right? That's what socialism is. And, I mean, Marx and Engels do talk about this in the manifesto, which I'm aware not everyone has read. And, that's like, well, okay, look, the stuff that you have, that you think of as your property is pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, like, okay, yes, it matters to you, your clothing, your bed, your house even, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not the stuff we're talking about. That stuff doesn't produce other wealth, right? I mean, and you know this for yourself, right? If it was capable of producing wealth, you wouldn't have to go to work every day, right? I mean, the reason you have to is because you don't have enough wealth to sustain yourself, right? To produce all the stuff that you need, or an income which will buy all the things that you need, right? So that's not the stuff we're talking about, right? We're talking about, the Marxist phrase is means of production, the things that can be used to produce other things. And that is not, should not be privately owned.
Exactly.
That's the Marxist argument, not, look, a personal property, of course one should have that, right? That's, I don't want someone stealing my pants. I want them to be there when I wake up in the morning, right? But that's, of course, not what we're talking about. I mean, unless pants are somehow now...
Right, but you've heard people make this argument, right? You've heard folks say, they want to take everything that which is completely not true. So I just feel like there's so many misconceptions about what the theory is in and of itself. And I think this is one of the big ones right here.